Chaos Barren, Chapter 5, Bring Me Your Heart. Shadow had first emerged in the middle of a cold desert night. The containment parameters of his pod must have been breached somehow, the most likely culprit being the extreme weather of the scorched land. He remembered catching glimpses of the blue planet in the facility, the hissing of decompressed air as his pod filled with the stasis fluid, and looking upward to see flashes of blood on buried. No, he didn't remember. His pod cracked. That was the first thing he remembered. The tiniest crack bringing it the first waves of wakefulness. He didn't wake all at once, consciousness instead creeping over him with glacial intent. The rapid shifts in temperature of the desert over the decades must have worn down the pod, meant to contain him. It landed in the wake of a ruined lab, the back of coordinates should the systems ever be compromised. He woke up slowly, the fluid of the stasis pod in his lungs, keeping them still and intact. After a couple of months of the groggy in between wakefulness and sleep, he'd finally managed enough energy to push through. His body had slumped over the jagged glass, falling limply on the frigid metal railing that crisscrosses most of the facility. Shadow remembered laying there as his body's systems remembered their purpose and actions, activating slowly. Breathing had been one of the firsts, a painful one. Hacking up fluid felt like coming to life. It wasn't peaceful, had never been for him. It was violent and visceral, and panic gripped him as he couldn't breathe until it had all been removed. But that first breath of cold desert air had still been the most beautiful relief he'd ever felt. Through the pain comes glory, the old saying had echoed dimly in his head, whispers of the past. Shadow grit his teeth as he remembered. He hated that saying. Sluggishly, Shadow's mind returned to the present, shaking off the old memories best left forgotten. Groaning, he rolled onto his back, blinking away the spots that lingered in his vision from the kid's lightning display. The beam that had shot down from the doctor's ship had been magnificent. He couldn't deny that. Blinding light and the energy swirling down in a whirlpool frenzy of rainbow lights and power. But the moment it had struck the earth, Shadow felt as if his very soul were being flayed alive. It was all energy, no life, no healing. It scorched him dry, burning through his own modest reserves. Reserves that had taken longer and longer to replenish in the past couple of weeks. Gosh, he could only imagine what it felt like to an already weakened Sonic. Agreeing to help had never been something Shadow had planned to do. He still wasn't sure why he'd agreed. It didn't make any sense, least of all to him. The ground was cold and hard beneath him, but he'd woken up on the ground from experiments many times before. It no longer frightened him. Shadow could hear the commotion around him, his eyelids growing heavy. Automatically, he ran a quick check of his body. Fingers and limbs were good. Slow to respond, but good. Nothing was broken. His body was sore, as if he'd just been in a serious sparring match or had been electrocuted. Forcing himself onto his side, Shadow began the process of trying to get back up. The descent back to the planet was a silent one, the quiet unbroken in the face of their failure. But the moment the hatch door hits open, crisp air flooding through the small carrier, pandemonium ruled.
Buck!
Tails rushed forward, gripping him hard. His own face was twisting in anguish, eyes bright with unshed tears.
Please, I don't know what happened. Sonic and Shadow.
Get Maddie!
Buck and Shadow recognized the scream as Wachowski, the boyish voice distorted by terror.
What's going?
Through the darkness, Buck could scarcely make out any shapes, until a dark head turned towards him, cobalt eyes sparking like lightning. In their dim light, Buck caught a glimpse. Shadow stiffening in horror as his keen eyes picked up the scene. Scar's body still on the bed, his shadow collapsed in a corner.
You heard him. Get Maddie.
Buck fumbled for a moment, reaching in his quills for the emeralds before remembering he didn't have it.
I'll go.
Shadow said lowly, an emerald already in hand. It was the one he had originally arrived with, managing to grab it from its capsule before the others had blinked out of existence, presumably returning to their original dimension. The next couple of minutes streaked by in a flurry of motion. Wachowski's face remained buried into Scar's side, the older hedgehog looking a whisper away from crumbling into the humid air, fur matted with sweat, darkened in places as if burned, and brow furrowed in pain and discomfort. The hedgehog was awake, but hardly present at all. Near the corner of the room, dragging himself into a sitting position, was Scar's shadow, looking worse for wear. Buck moved towards him, noting that the other hedgehog looked like he'd just run a marathon for days. But before he made it even halfway across the hangar, the now familiar punch of chaos control emanated from the center of the room. Shadow materialized in a brief flash of light, face grim, and with a human woman holding onto his hand in a white-knuckled grip. She looked around frantically the moment her eyes adjusted, a name on her lips. Finally, the boy moved.
Mom!
He cried out, still holding on to scarves, blue energy crackling faintly. Maddie all but sprinted to him, stopping at the bedside. Wachowski threw his arms around her, melting into the powerful embrace, before jerking back and reaching for scarves again, a guilty look flashing across his face. Pressing a brief kiss and nuzzle to his head, Maddie sprung into action, setting a black canvas bag on the work table beside the bed.
What happened?
Her tone was brisk, professional. Wachowski scrubbed at his face, brows scrunching in frustration.
I don't know. He was coughing like he couldn't breathe. They said the doctor had stabilized him, but then the machine stopped beeping and I felt it spark out and I woke him up.
Maddie whipped around to look at him.
What?
Wachowski seemed to shrink into himself, as if he'd done something wrong.
I woke him up?
It took her a moment to connect the dots. Scars had flatlined, and her Sonic had woken him up. Oh. Nodding once, she attempted to smile, heart twisting in her throat.
That was a very brave thing you did, Sonic. I'm proud of you. But right now, I need you to go with Shadow. Maybe outside for a little bit.
No, Mom. You don't understand. He needs me.
Maddie wanted to put her foot down there and then. Send him away before he could see anything more than what he already had. But she simply didn't know enough about the situation. She didn't have the entire picture. To her left, she turned to see Tails, a myriad of emotions crossing her face as she took in the taller, exhausted, and burned form of the fox, a far cry from the worried but unharmed fox kid she left back at home only a few minutes ago. It took her a second longer to regain her composure.
I need to know exactly what happened. Bring the doctor or whoever was keeping an eye on him beforehand.
Thankfully, Miss Tails quickly nodded and grabbed what looked like a portable screen off the table, dutifully reciting what he knew as he gestured for a figure that was behind her. Maddie remained impassive as she considered the information she was given. Fluid in his lungs, seizure, heart failure.
I managed to get him stable before we left.
Dr. Eggman added as Tails took a brief pause, stepping closer to the monitor that logged Scar's vitals. Again, the doctor seemed to slip into the cooler persona, outbursts and jabs non-existent, as he pored over the information on the scanner. Maddie eyed him coldly, the ice in her eyes halting the doctor dead in his tracks. Without a word, she extended her hand for the results he was holding, snatching them out of his hands when he failed to move quick enough.
And?
Eggman looked to Tails for help, but the fox seemed equally confused. They both winced as Maddie turned to glare at the taller man.
And? Or am I supposed to read your mind as well, Doctor?
Eggman's mustache twitched.
No! The immediate readings after the blast were peculiar. If you see here, there was a huge dip.
Buck stepped away from the two, tuning out the finer details as he looked around for Scar's shadow. Sidestepping the two humans, he quickly made his way to the corner he'd last seen him in. Shadow was still on the floor, trying to rise shakily on two arms. The hedgehog at least seemed aware of his surroundings, scowling once he caught sight of Buck. Moving swiftly, Buck knelt beside this shadow.
Chance, hey. Man, are you okay?
Before he could even touch him, Shadow jerked back, breathing harshly.
I'm fine. I'm just drained, but I'm fine.
Buck frowned, doubting very much that the other was fine. He turned to the group, gathering around Scar's bed.
Yo, Wachowski, can you spare some juice for Shadow? I think the blast might have affected him too.
On the ground, Shadow snorted, bracing himself on his forearms. Buck frowned in concern, but didn't reach out to offer help again.
Hey, don't force yourself. Just wait for the kid.
I am the ultimate life form. I've endured energy drainage and more before.
Buck frowned. What in the world did that mean? Not for the first time, Buck wondered if this shadow was more different than similar to his own. But before he could ask any questions, Wachowski had arrived, wiping at his eyes quickly with his forearms.
Hi.
The boy greeted quickly, extending a hand towards Shadow, stopping when he saw the dark hedgehog look up at him, glancing between the burnt glass and the boy's tear-streaked muzzle.
It won't hurt.
He quietly assured the silent question he read in the black hedgehog's eyes.
I'm not afraid of pain. Just get it over with.
Gingerly, as if to be sure the other was watching, Wachowski's palm met Shadow's shoulder. The black hedgehog tensed momentarily before relaxing. It wasn't painful. It was just warm and overpowering, like a drink going down too fast. He winced as the energy laced through his system, feeling more like a fried wire than a healed hedgehog. Coughing once, Shadow shook the hand off, shaking his head.
Stop. That's enough. I can't filter anything more.
Wachowski pulled back, looking between his hand and Shadow in confusion.
Why?
He asked. He'd barely transferred any over. Scars had taken much more over the past couple of days. But Shadow only shrugged, furrowing his brow in concentration. Sifting through the kid's energy was like reaching through a roaring current. Hardly anything was compatible.
It feels wrong.
Buck watched him sharply.
It feels wrong?
He echoed, leaning in closer. Shadow rolled his eyes at that, looking very much like he'd thrown a punch at Buck once he had the energy.
Harmonizing his chaos energy to fit my own body is not as simple as you may think, Hedgehog.
Alarm was blooming slowly in Buck's gaze as he looked between Shadow, Wachowski, and Scarves. But before he could ask any questions, Tails was calling them over.
Hey, wait a second, little bud. I think...
Oh, one moment, Buck. I'm just trying to make sense of these readings. Scar's energy has the weirdest patterns lately. Kind of familiar.
Yeah, about that. Look, I just talked to Shiro and I think...
Tails, have you been giving him adrenaline or any other kind of drug?
Maddie suddenly took the scanner from the fox, staring at it intently.
What? Of course not. The only thing he's gotten has been...
chaos energy.
Buck finished the sentence, all eyes turned to him at that moment. And then it made sense. The incompatibility, the strange spikes in usage. Wachowski's energy had helped Scarves, but body couldn't live off of adrenaline. It had to crash. It had to shut down.
His body is reacting like it's a drug.
Maddie stated, putting the pad down, leaning against the work table.
What the heck does that mean?
Like adrenaline, it helps for a moment, but it burns through all your reserved strength and you crash. That's why Scars was fine for a bit before.
Buck saw the moment in which his shadow processed the information. The careful neutrality in his eyes that meant the dark hedgehog was pulling away from the moment. The transference of energy had been his shadow's idea, based on his own knowledge of chaos energy. He'd put it forward and asked the kid to do it. He inadvertently caused Scars to burn through whatever scrapes he had. The taller shadow stepped forward, then understanding a light in his eyes.
That's why the kid's energy felt wrong, because it is wrong for us. There's no harmony. It doesn't fit. Have you been drugging him this entire time without even knowing?
Hey! We couldn't have known we only... So, I've been hurting him?
and it's not a question. Both their eyes snapped to Wachowski. Either way, as he spoke, eyes trained firmly on his burned gloves. Understanding dawned on Buck and Shadow as they realized what they had done. What they'd asked Wachowski to do. Wachowski could hear the sound of his own breathing in his ears, growing to a deafening volume. He had to leave, now. Few eyes could follow his form as he raced out of the room, Maddie calling out after him before he had even moved. The smaller Shadow began to move after him, his skates hissing with energy, before a hand on his shoulder stopped him. He turned to see Buck, face set in a frown, green eyes hard.
Don't. I'll go.
And in a similar streak of blue, the hero was gone. Sonic the Hedgehog needed quick reflexes and reaction skills to be able to run at the speeds he did, without crashing into something as simple as a tree. Right now, all of Buck's skills were being put to the test as he raced after the kid. Wachowski was fast. The miles disappeared beneath his feet in the breaths of a second, Buck trailing behind him. Truthfully, Buck was faster under certain circumstances, but a part of him understood that the kid needed this, needed to move, to get away. So Buck trailed behind him, content to follow and watch until it was time to stop. They couldn't have run for more than an hour before Wachowski tripped. The kid must not have yet developed a strong, consistent focus while running because it was a rock of all things that broke his flow. Buck winced at the cry of pain and slowed to a jog as he watched the boy tumble before ducking into a ball to soften the blow. He found him in the center of a wide plain, panting heavily in the earth. Dirt, sweat, and tears streaked across his muzzle. The older hedgehog hung back, waiting to be noticed, steps as silent as a whisper even across the dry grass. Wachowski sniffled, dragging himself into a sitting position before wiping furiously at his face.
Stupid.
He pressed the heels of his dirtied hands against his eyes, body curling into the movement.
So dumb, so stupid. You only hurt.
Well, that was enough of that. Buck stepped forward, mindful to be more clumsy than usual. The dry grass crackled beneath his sneakers.
Hey, kiddo. Glad I finally caught up to you.
Wachowski froze for a moment, before turning to give him a baleful glare.
What are you doing here?
Came to check up on you.
Buck stepped closer, stopping when he saw his other self's shoulders tense, as if in preparation to run again.
You want to talk about it?
The kid looked away, knees drawing up closer, arms wrapping around his legs.
Not really.
Oh no.
Can I sit down?
At the kid's nod, Buck settled beside him on the grass, mindful to leave plenty of room between the two. The silence felt ugly, damaging. Buck tugged at the edge of his glove, a nervous habit he'd never broken that left the cuffs all in his gloves loose and open.
I'm sorry.
Wachowski closed his eyes, tucking his head away as if afraid to look at Buck's face. Slowly, Buck stretched out his legs, knocking a sneaker against Wachowski's face, not quite breaking the bubble yet. The dull pain in his knees and palms was fading. Wachowski found that most pains and aches generally went away quickly and on their own. He focused his gaze on the dry grass in front of him, unable to see the reaction of his other self. The same expression he might make to himself if he could. Annoyance, anger, disappointment.
Some Sonic I am.
The thought tasted bitter, welling a fresh batch of tears in his eyes. Buck said nothing else, sitting beside Wachowski, letting him run through the emotions and thoughts on his own, something Wachowski was grateful for. A dark voice streaked across his thoughts, suddenly muffling them like a fog rolling in. The voice said, "Come back." The whisper felt more than heard, Wachowski only able to catch the tail end of it. Ice trickled down his spine as he recognized the deep timbre, the same one that had whispered to him as he tried to save Scarves. Wachowski shoved the thought down, flicking his ears back in his best attempt to block out the sound.
You okay there, kiddo?
Buck was looking at him now.
I'm fine.
Wachowski muttered, wiggling a finger in his ear.
You know you don't have to pretend with me.
Buck said, softer this time. He leaned back to rest on his palms, peering up into the night sky. The smell of salt and brine drifted across the air. They must have ended up near the coast.
I'm you in a way. I get it. Being the hero is hard.
And when Buck looked at him, Wachowski believed him. The voice came back, saying, "Bring me back." The words could hardly be made out. Silent wail crawling over the pain to settle deep in Wachowski's bones. He fought off a shiver, tucking his body in closer beneath his arms.
Have you ever run into strange stuff?
Even as he asked it, Wachowski thought the question sounded stupid.
Strange how? I mean, the answer is yes, but you might have to be a bit more specific, bud.
I don't know, like, just strange. Weird stuff that you didn't know how to deal with. How did you end up dealing with it?
Wachowski pressed his fingers into his knuckles, unconsciously tightening the gloves around his hands. Buck leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. The two blue hedgehogs sat in the quiet field, silence settling easily this time. It felt good to tell someone. He had his parents. The word still felt so foreign sometimes. But telling Buck felt safe somehow.
There's not just one way to handle the stuff that gets thrown at you. Weird stuff it seems to be a part of our lives. And over time, you're gonna learn how to rely on friends and your own instincts.
Wachowski mulled that over. Buck was roughly 5 years older than him, but the difference in experience between them was unfathomable. At his age, Buck had already battled various enemies and even a god, if BB's stories were to be believed. Wachowski was barely coming into his own. Sure, Robotnik had been every sort of crazy, but it'd been just the one crazy scientist. The younger hero didn't have the battle-honed instincts of the others. Not yet, at least.
Strange adventures come with their own price, but you don't have to do this alone.
A soft shoulder nudged into him, and Wachowski glanced up to see Buck smiling down at him, gently and understanding.
We're here for you, all of us. Just like you've been there for Scarves. You've got something special, kid. And something gives me the feeling that you're gonna be the best of all of us.
But
Wachowski swallowed, looking at his gloves. The palms were darkened, a result of the explosion of chaos energy that had torn from his body.
I hurt him this whole time. I mean, I tried to help, but all I ended up doing was...
Hey!
The dry grass crackled as Buck shifted his weight to face Wachowski fully.
I can't lie to you and tell you this doesn't suck.
Wachowski had to chuckle along with the statement, the light so at odds with the heavy topic.
But we're all Sonic, right?
Wachowski's ears flicked at the name and he nodded reluctantly.
I guess.
You guess. Look!
Buck poked at his shoulder, plucking gently at blue fur.
How many super fast blue hedgehogs have you run across before?
Wachowski fought the urge to smile, smoothing his fur down.
I hadn't really run across any other hedgehogs before meeting you.
Huh. Buck silently resolved to fix that in the future.
Well, of course not, because I can assure you, no matter what world we're in, Sonic the Hedgehog is one of a kind. And it isn't the speed, it's not the power, and it isn't even really the great sense of humor.
He tossed the kid a wink, who had wide eyes trained on him now.
But it's because of the simple fact that we never give up.
In one fluid movement, Buck was on his feet, hand extended to help Wachowski up.
And even now, under everything, you're still rearing to help, aren't you?
Wachowski nodded, a bit confused, but Buck was right. Finding out he'd been hurting Scars had been awful. But it wouldn't stop him from trying to help his friend, however he could.
And how do I know that, you may ask?
Buck sounded awfully smug, sleeking his quills back for good measure.
One thing's pretty clear. Once you run into multiple versions of yourself, we do our best to protect people, especially the people we care about.
Looking at the older speedster, Wachowski could see a glimpse of his own future in Buck's eyes, full of peril, fear, friends, new and old, hope, and unyielding determination. It sounded terrifying, but it also sounded amazing.
Our friends count on us, and you and I count on our friends. Scarves is counting on you, just like we're counting on him to hold on.
A gloved fist reached out to nudge his shoulder gently.
So don't quit trying, Wachowski, because that's the only time you'll ever lose.
Images of red spines, a golden ring, and brown feathers flashed across Wachowski's mind. He sighed, looking down at his hands.
I've already lost someone. Longclaw, Did you have Longclaw?
Wachowski saw Buck shake his head slightly.
Was she important to you?
Yeah, she was very important to me. Tom and Maggie tell me that it's not my fault the echidnas attacked us.
The kid missed the shock that struck across the older hedgehog's face.
But sometimes I can't help but think,
That you could have done better?
Wachowski nodded.
I know I could have. And Scars now? I can't, Buck. I can't lose him too. Not after I've hurt him like this.
And why did it suddenly feel so hard to breathe?
Buck, what if he dies because of what I did? What if I killed?
Do you want to know what the hardest thing about being a hero is? A hero? Sometimes I can't believe that's the word they use. But it's there, isn't it?
I'm no hero.
You saved your family. That's pretty heroic.
That was just...
Nuh-uh. You protected and defended your home, your family. Maulclaw, and the hardest part is that you can't save everyone, no matter how hard we try sometimes. I lost a lot of people, and it doesn't get any easier. I remember them. All of them.
Do you blame yourself too?
The concept seemed so alien to Wachowski. Buck seemed so confident, so self-assured, always smiling and cracking jokes. The other hedgehog nodded, the gesture so slight he might have missed it. His eyes weren't laughing now. The slight curve of his smile was the last piece of the shield he bore.
Sometimes it's hard not to, but you need to accept the possibility that not everyone in the world can be saved. That our best, whether we like it or not, is all we can give.
He looked up towards the dark sky and sighed.
So we give it all we got. We face things head on.
Wachowski's thoughts trickled back to the creeping whisper, the chill it had brought him, as it echoed in his mind. The fear he'd also felt as he'd run away, tried to escape the unknown. He took a deep breath, making a choice in that moment.
I've been hearing voices.
The moment the words were out of his mouth, he regretted them, wincing at how crazy he sounded. But Buck only hummed, looking thoughtful.
This is a pretty weird place. Mind telling me what kind of voice?
I'm not sure. I heard it after you shot the energy up planet. Maybe a couple times before. It always seems to come from that direction.
He pointed across the field into the darkness. For a moment, Buck said nothing, the hero deep in thought. Wachowski found himself feeling a lot less afraid than he'd been before. The chill brought on by the voice had been chased away by Buck's words. He stared up at the bright, cold stars, content to wait for the moment.
I can't say I have an answer as to what it is, but I'm glad you told me. I think we're all going to have to be on our toes if we want to make it through.
This was, as the kids say, not good. Buck hadn't felt terribly alarmed when Wachowski had told him about the voice. Sure, it wasn't a good thing, but he trusted the kid's senses of self so far to rule out anything funky. Wachowski's innate connection to chaos energy was a mystery. It could very well give him an insight to this place no one else had. But when he'd pointed in the direction he'd been hearing it, straight towards Angel Island. With all the adventures he's been through, Buck was no stranger to disembodied voices. They weren't always dangerous, but they couldn't help but feeling on edge. It could all very well be a coincidence, but in his experience, that was often a terrible excuse. They were missing part of a puzzle. He just knew it. He only hoped they could figure it out before it was too late.
You about ready to head back?
He asked lightly, leaning into a stretch to warm up his legs again. Wachowski nodded back firmly, jogging in place briefly.
Yeah, I kinda wish I hadn't run out so far though.
The kid frowned at the direction they'd come from. They had certainly gone far, skirted around the edges of a desert at some point.
Think about it as round 2.
Buck's eyes gleamed with the new challenge.
And kid or not, I will leave you in the dust.
Wachowski burst into a short laugh, pointing at Buck boldly.
You're on, old-timer.
Buck spluttered into the suddenly empty space where a blue hedgehog had once stood before streaking off in pursuit, sneakers digging into the earth, faster and faster as he picked up speed.
I'll show you, old.
Wachowski's laughter ran over the plains and into the night. The evening light had given way to deep pink hues. When the beam of energy had struck the ground, the planet was sparking for a moment. Amy, Tails, and even Tucker had all felt something, like the whisper of a breeze in a still suffocating basement. But it died as quickly as it came. But the echidnas had sensed the beam even as it arched down towards the planet. Even Tikal gasped harshly when the energy surged through the earth, exploding outwards in powerful echoes, had narrowed her eyes at the foreign sensation. But Knuckles had to brace himself against the tree, the bandages on his hands catching on the tree bark. It had felt like slamming a sword against metal, vibrations ringing through his limbs to finally die in his core, wrong and disharmonic. It hadn't taken. He'd known it before he opened his eyes and looked up at Amy's face, crouched over her communicator. The situation had hardly changed, except now they were stuck on this island.
We'll keep looking on our end, Tails. Don't worry about us right now, okay? Stay with Sonic and send the plane in the morning.
Already Knuckles could see the gears turning in her head, and he had to stop again and admire the strength of his friend. The group had settled around the campfire, Tucker and Takolo joining them. As Knuckles had foraged briefly for food on the island, he was struck by how much it reminded him of when he was young, foraging for food for himself. He'd met Amy in the jungle too. Dinner was a quiet and quick affair. The fire crackled low, lending the night air a peaceful glow. But there was little peace felt with the cloud that hung over the group.
We should have known.
The shorter Knuckles sighed after the silence had turned suffocating, chin resting on a palm as he peered into the fire. The remains of the simple dinner had already vanished. The energy had felt right to him, but part of it had been from his own world.
We should have known the energy wouldn't be compatible. We almost...
Sonic is alive.
Amy cut in firmly, startling the other out of his self-imposed reverie. Her green eyes were hard, and the resistance leader could see how strong she was trying to be in that moment.
You're right. We gotta pick up and keep trying.
Beside him, the taller Knuckles was tugging off the gloves he had been lent. They'd aided immensely in fusing the large gem, but were more cumbersome now, more than anything. Maybe if he had grown up wearing them, they might feel more natural to his hands. His counterpart accepted them with a nod, black-tipped hands disappearing once more behind the thick white fabric.
What's next then?
He asked, head cocked as if listening for something.
Tails didn't say anything about any new plan. I told him we'd keep looking here.
Amy sighed, shuffling close to the fire. Rolling off the treetops, Knuckles could smell the fresh scent of rain incoming. They had all settled easily into subtle, creative burrows, indents in the dirt, reminiscent of their early years when they had to survive as children in the wild. But they would offer no shelter from the rain.
Should we consider finding shelter soon, guys? Rain's coming soon.
Knuckles tugged at his bandages again.
Oh yeah, I can smell it too.
The library should be a good spot. You might even be able to continue searching for answers for your friend.
Good idea. I promised Tails that we'd keep looking for answers, and we're lucky to have UT, but he can only work through so many scrolls.
I'm actually able to read a little bit of the ancient Echidna language.
Really? That's amazing. Could you help us? Even if it's just to work out what material might not be worth translating, it cut down the time we needed by a lot.
Of course, my understanding of it is rudimentary, but I can make out basic words and even some sentences. My father taught me what I know.
I can't believe you know a whole other language.
The taller Knuckles gaped, his shorter counterpart looking slightly intrigued beside him as well. Flustered by the compliments, Tikal rocked back on her heels, the air cooling her skin.
It's really nothing special, but I'd be honored to help you. It's your language too, Knuckles. I'd be happy to teach you what I know. Granted, it's nothing very advanced, but...
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Hopefully Tails will explode when I learn to read a language he can't read.
Knuckles snickered, already imagining the look on the fox's face.
May I ask, Tucker, how do you know so much about the Echidna tribe? All Tikal has been able to say is what you've taught her, and I suppose I'm just curious.
The turtle smiled at her, lips pursing as he pondered the question, weighing the words to say.
As you know, I worked with the ancients long ago. I worked in a research facility. I know the Echidna tribe well, the things I learned. I did my best to pass on, that's all.
Amy returned his smile, rising up when Tikal suggested they find some shelter before the rain hit. Suspicious violet eyes stayed trained on the older turtle, however. Knuckles had to learn many things since first leaving his floating island, when Sonic and Tails had crash-landed onto it many years ago. It was this knowledge that made him so certain of something. The turtle was hiding something else. The smell of ancient paper hung in the air, the glow of the sun through the skylights long since dimmed. Knuckles had managed to find small torches, setting them near Amy's work area in order to be better able to see. Her and the other two Knuckles had opted to spend the night inside the library, keyed on learning all they could before the break of dawn brought with another tragedy. Tucker and Tikal had decided to join them. After all, their campground smothered out by the sudden squall. The two kept their distance, however, the warm light of the torches and gentle patter of rain lending the room a surreal atmosphere. In the dimness, they could imagine this was simply an evening in the library, where an Echidna scholar or student might walk through the doors and join their table at any given moment. It was strange, as if history was trying to come alive. What was it Tikal had said about the emerald?
There's something there, alive.
Shaking the strange feeling, Knuckles picked up the electronic scanner pad Tails had left behind. UT's translations had been uploaded to it to make the work easier. Not being able to read had never really bothered him, but seeing Buck's and his Knuckles' reaction to that had left him feeling bad. The symbols on the screen meant nothing to him. He scrolled through the documents mournfully. The knowledge of his people eluded him even now.
You okay, Knuckles?
Yeah, just fine. Just wondering, you know.
The pink hedgehog hummed thoughtfully, hands extended for the electronic pad. Knuckles didn't hesitate to hand it to her. Knowing him, he'd probably break it in the first chance he...
Would you like me to read it to you?
Knuckles looked at her in surprise, expecting to see a teasing smile or a mocking grin. The Amy's look only curious.
That'd be real nice of you, Ames.
He smiled sincerely, settling down on the floor.
Nah, it's what friends are for. Now, any requests in particular? I doubt you'd be interested in foreign military affairs. Yuck.
Turning to the other Knuckles, Amy handed him an extra pad.
Here, read up and see if you can find anything interesting while I read to Knuckles for a bit.
Snorting in amusement, Knuckles took the device from her.
Clearly, bossiness runs in all Amy's.
Suddenly, his face was full of pink hedgehog.
I've been meaning to ask, what's your Amy like? Strong, powerful, independent?
Hey, interrogate leader.
Fine. What kind of story then?
Anything not boring.
There was that odd work of fiction Tails had mentioned right before they'd gotten the call from Styx, the call that Sonic was dying. Immediately, she shut the thought out.
Keep it cool, Amy. Just find the story.
It didn't take too long to find it. With Knuckles settled, she opened the file and began to read. Tikal wrapped her damp shawl around her shoulders, shivering slightly in the stillness of the room. She had not expected to ever run across another Echidna in her life. Her father had told her from an early age that most of the remains of the civilization had either been hunted down or fallen while hunting the dregs of his own people. Despite this, finding the tall Echidna had felt right, like meeting a long-lost family member. She had only ever vaguely been aware of, only heard from second-hand stories. The other Echidna, however, Tikal kept her gaze trained on the flickering flames of the torch, inching closer to ward off the chill. The shorter of the two echidnas would not stop staring at her, gaze unreadable for most. He had been the one to announce that she shouldn't be alive.
He must think I can't notice.
She thought, amused for a moment, but Tikal had grown up on the run her whole life and was an expert in noticing the smallest of details. Her father raised her, taking them from village to village, rarely staying in one place longer than 2 years. It had been a hard life for a puggle, but she had her father, and he had given her the stories. Besides her father slept lightly, the turtle's head leaning forward against his shell. Tucker had been alive for over 1,000 years, there when it all began and fell apart. He had told her the wondrous stories about her people, their culture, their advances. It had felt as if they were still alive. It had felt as if they were still alive and waiting to welcome her back home, back to where she truly belonged. They were nestled against the side of a massive stone bookcase, the torches embedded in the stone blazing brightly. The warmth was scant but welcome. The coolness of the library had been a welcoming reprieve in the heat of the day, but now the chill threatened to pierce her fur, her wet clothes not helping much. In the center of the library, the pink hedgehog's voice was reading steadily. The warmth was scant but welcome. The coolness of the library had been a welcoming reprieve in the heat of the day, but now the chill threatened to pierce her fur, her wet clothes not helping much. In the center of the library, the pink hedgehog's voice was reading steadily.
Amy,
Her mind provided helpfully. Tikal listened in. Something about the words sounded familiar.
And when the speakers arrived, the city rejoiced. The world was fragile and dying, the last embers threatening to flicker out. But the star speakers were healers, so our people welcomed them as brethren, a sibling race.
The shorter of the two knuckles was leaning back in a wooden chair, scrolling through an electronic scanner silently. The tallest one was laid out on the floor, eyes half-lidded, as he listened to the pink hedgehog.
There were two chosen among the star speakers who came to heal their world. Chaos walked among them, lending them his power in exchange for,
a body.
Tikal finished the sentence, quiet voice ringing through the hall. The trio looked at her curiously, the spell woven by the storytelling now broken.
I know that story.
It's an old story.
Amy told her, glancing at the scanner.
Yes, my father told me about it. The pact between Chaos and the Star Speakers. The friendship between my people and the Speakers. It sounded so magical, so fantastic.
Would you like to tell us the story?
Amy asked her, breaking the gentle mirage. Tikal shook her head, however, a small smile on her lips as she leaned back.
No, I never heard the story from the direct source. Please, Amy, continue.
The orange echidna was aware of eyes on her. The short echidna again. Looking at him, she was surprised to see he didn't glance away, but instead continued to stare. His expression fell ever so slightly as he glanced at her hands and brow. After a moment, he returned to his own scanner. Tikal said nothing, giving her attention to Amy, who had continued reading from the translations. Clearing a throat, Amy reached for the water bottle she had tucked away in her pack.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Amy. You don't have to keep reading. It was wonderful to hear nonetheless. I never thought I might hear the myths from the source itself.
Those stories are no myths.
As one, they turned to see the elderly turtle carefully rising to his feet. He blinked at the sudden attention, smiling apologetically.
Forgive me, I was listening in.
Do you know something we don't, old man?
The shorter echidna narrowed his eyes at the turtle. Ever since they met, he couldn't shake off a feeling that the turtle was hiding something big.
The Star Speakers were common knowledge when I was younger. Their healing prowess was known by nearly everyone, but I'm not surprised they fell into myths and folklore. They specialized in healing with energy. It sounds rather fantastical after a couple of generations.
Did you just say energy healing?
Yes, I did.
Nuts!
Amy placed her hand on his arm, and a misplaced anger fled his body at the voice of the pink hedgehog. Knuckles only snorted, looking away. Amy then turned back to Tucker.
He didn't know. We never explained what was actually wrong with him. If what you say is true, then do you think the Star Speaker's knowledge could help our Sonic? Something's wrong. He's been losing too much energy, chaos energy.
Tucker stilled, hands shaking ever so slightly that anyone might have missed it. Knuckles, however, zeroed in on the turtle.
I think so. They first came here to heal our dying world, after all. Maybe there's a book of healing somewhere here.
He broke Amy's gaze, adjusting his own shawl and medallion. But Amy didn't notice his odd reaction already bursting into movement, as his confirmation easily shaking off her own tiredness.
In that case, we need to be quick. We need to find everything they have on the Star Speakers.
Even Tikal moved to help, ushering her reluctant father down one of the many stone shelves. She carefully sorted through the scrolls and tomes, sounding out the strange syllables she could make out. They searched violently into the wee hours of the night. Any other time, Amy would have downed multiple pots of coffee to stay awake. But in the jungle, hundreds of miles away from civilization, all they had to keep them awake was the burning drive to save their friend. Surprising everyone but Buck Snuggles, Tucker was the first to find something concrete. The turtle had pulled down a symbol-bound book, his attention caught by the brightly colored symbol.
What luck! Finding a written book by the Star Speakers themselves.
Even as he'd suggested the idea, the thought of finding any written material had seemed unlikely to him. Ears perking up, Tikal was immediately peering over his shoulder, eyes shining with excitement, as she called Amy and the others over.
So they are true.
Yes, they are. They are very real.
He touched the cover of the book forlornly.
How do you know it's written by a Star Speaker?
Amy asked, taking the book from the turtle gently.
The embossed symbol on the spine.
He pointed to the brightly stamped symbol, tracing the spiral that marked the book, flecks of red paint, still clinging bravely to the leather.
That was their symbol. After many years, the finer details of things are lost to time, but I've never been able to forget that symbol.
Well, what are you waiting for? Scan it!
The shorter echidna all but barked, but his nervousness was given away by the way he leaned over Amy's shoulder, craning to get a look at the book. She moved quickly, hands fumbling slightly over UT's control as the machine scanned the pages. Once he finished, she snapped up the pad, eyes skimming over the words that appeared on screen.
Well,
Tikal couldn't help but lean forward as well, the words too far away to make out.
Okay, I just got it. It seems to be a diary?
Their faces fell collectively. It was an incredible find, but nothing that would help them in their current strains.
Oh, wait! Energy, yes! Chaos healing! The Star Speakers was a healer.
She spent the next couple of minutes reading passages aloud, sometimes stopping altogether to skim a bit further. Finally, she began an entry that was more useful.
Today I received a message from my mother. She's back home. But the carrier was able to bring me a letter. The Sentinel warned us of going back more than needed. Apparently our supply of rings is running low. I hope that is remedied soon. This planet's inhabitants had been nothing but kind, but I'm homesick. I spent the day healing a portion of this world alongside the Ethereal and his Sentinel. They're such goofs, you'd hardly imagine the amount of chaos they can wield. Trekking up the shrine was a huge pain. One of the echidnas standing guard said it was because it was easiest to spread the energy out that way, like a beacon. Yeah, it sounds like a smart choice, but my feet say otherwise. Healing beside the emerald is nice. However, sure, some of the other healers can be distracting, but the chaos that rolls off the emerald is enough to deal with the absence of it in the air. I needed it too. I nearly kneeled over walking up the shrine, and I swear I'm in shape. To be honest, I'm a little worried. I didn't put this in my letter home. I didn't want my mother to worry, but maybe I can keep it here. Most of us need to visit the emerald once a week now to regain some of the energy we're losing. I've never been in such a place before. I don't know why anyone would suck the chaos from a planet, but it feels horrible. The natives of this planet seem to be handling it better than we are. I hope we're able to fix it soon and leave.
Trailing off into silence, Amy looked up at her audience. She glanced at Tucker, the turtle's brow furrowed, eyes closed as if in pain.
Should I stop?
She asked quietly, looking between him and Tikal. The orange echidna nodded gently, reaching out to grasp her father's arm.
What did they mean by sucking the chaos from a planet?
Knuckles!
Amy hissed, noticing Tucker's wince, but she couldn't say she wasn't curious as well. But Knuckles didn't back down, staring the ancient turtle down boldly.
It was you, wasn't it? You're kind.
The turtle was silent for a long while. When he finally looked at the echidna, the look on his face said it all.
I didn't know.
Knuckles stepped forward, aggression in every line of his body.
I think you better start explaining then.
It's true.
Tucker sighed. He had insisted they sit for this, but Knuckles had fire in his veins, so the resistance leader settled for pacing around the table.
It was a scientist. There was a revolutionary discovery, the creation of chaos crystals. They were... Once I found out what they were.
His hand gripped the pouch once more. The turtle closed his eyes for a moment, warding off screams of the past.
Father, you don't have to.
I do.
The ancient turtle opened his eyes to give his adopted daughter a weak smile.
What did the ancients really do?
Amy asked, looking from the pouch to the turtle warily.
They wanted a way to harness chaos energy, chaos itself. And when they began to harness more than they should, well, the planet began to die.
The turtle spread his palm, gesturing to the space around them.
When the ancients learned that chaos was in every living thing, they began to draw from the planet itself, not knowing the consequences it would bring. No one knew. At least, that's what I thought. The Star Speakers came to heal the world. The echidnas welcomed them in peace, and so did the ancients,
Until they realized the chaos energy the Star Speakers had. The ancients didn't care about healing the planet, did they? Those machines out there, those belonged to them, didn't they?
The Sentinel machines, yes, they did. A sect of ancients wanted chaos, but chaos needed to be in balance, drawing from the very planet itself, mining it from living beings. It ruined everything. The Star Speakers came to restore the balance of this world, and the echidnas welcomed them as friends. I was just a researcher, but I aided in the slaughter, as if I had been a warrior either way. You have to understand, it was all I knew. It wasn't until after.
The silence stretched out from seconds to minutes. The group exchanged concerned glances, but the turtle only gazed further into the fire. Tikal whispered soft words, gently shaking him, as if it's a routine they had. After a moment, Tucker blinked and turned to look at her gratefully before continuing.
I left. After they attacked the Echidna City and went after the Star Speakers, I couldn't bear to. I spent the rest of my life making up for it.
He shook his head, pulling out an engraved medallion that had been tucked away beneath the folds of his shawl.
The emblem of the ancients. I wore it as a mark of shame now, something I can never forget or truly make up for.
But Father taught me everything he could about my people, our prayers, our culture, even some of our stories.
We don't have time to argue over blame.
Amy cut in smoothly, shooting the shorter Knuckles a pointed look.
Fine then. Let's just get clear of a few things up, shall we?
Knuckles was trying really hard to wrap his head around the situation. His shorter counterpart seemed to be asking more questions with Tikal, fielding as much as she could. But Knuckles was still stuck thinking about the words the old diary they had found. Turning towards the staircase, the echidna wondered if maybe they had gone about solving this all wrong. He pondered the journal entry they'd just heard. The mystery of the Star Speakers, as well as the strange, hollow sensation he'd sensed the moment the chaos energy had crashed into the earth only hours earlier. A similar hollowness to Scar's, if he was remembering right. Slowly, an idea began to creep into place. The village was dark and silent by the time the two blue hedgehogs speeded back, but both of them moved confidently, their race turning into a friendly jog after Wachowski had eaten dirt for the second time that night. It didn't escape Buck's attention that the younger hog seemed very at home in the wilderness, movements more like BB's as he moved through the forest areas. By now, Buck had become accustomed to living in a house, but he remembered not having that at some point.
They're still awake.
Wachowski whispered, pointing at the lights still on at Scar's hut.
Looks that way. Come on, your mom must be worried.
Wachowski winced, but nodded, following the older hedgehog inside. The living room was empty, save for the human woman that Buck knew to be the kid's mom, and Styx, who seemed to be doing her best to stay alive.
Hey, Mom. Styx?
Wachowski greeted weakly, shuffling from foot to foot. Maddie jerked up at his voice, relaxing visibly when she saw him.
Sonic, honey, are you alright?
She trailed off briefly, reaching out to him. Wachowski closed the gap between them, melting into the embrace.
Sorry for making you worry.
Oh, psh, me? Worry? No. I know my boy. I was keeping everyone else together, especially that Tails. Poor little guy.
She hugged him a little tighter nonetheless.
Oh my gosh.
Wachowski hopped up, looking towards the hallway into the direction of the hangar.
Scars, is he okay? Is Shadow okay?
Hey, slow down. Shadow is fine. Weak, but fine for now.
She looked at Buck for a moment, and he could tell there was more she wasn't saying.
The nice Shadow is in there with Scars. His Tails and the less nice Shadow, Scars, fell asleep a while ago.
What about Egghead and BB?
Buck asked, glancing around. He hadn't seen any machines outside either. Maddie's mouth pressed into a thin line.
BB's asleep. The doctor said he'd be back at dawn.
The human sounded unhappy about that, and Buck supposed he couldn't blame her considering what he'd gleaned from their own Eggman.
I'm gonna see Scarves.
Wachowski stated, not having been unable to look away from the hallway for very long. But before he could get far, Maddie was grasping his arm.
Are you sure? He's very hurt, Sonic.
I'm sure, Mom. I need to see him. I can't give up on him.
Honey, I just want to prepare you.
For what? Scarves is gonna be fine.
He tugged a little harder.
Sonic, he's very hurt, and I've done all I can.
Finally, Wachowski stilled, gaze dropping to the ground. His hand curled into a fist briefly before relaxing. Buck felt his heart ache for the kid. Of course he'd experienced loss. Eggman had devastated his world for nearly 6 months at one point. But it never got easier. But when Wachowski looked up to meet Maddie's eyes, his gaze was clear and calm, determination blazing beneath the surface so powerfully, Buck was floored by its intensity.
Thank you for helping.
He told her, curling his own hands to hold hers.
I know he's not looking too good, but I don't want to give up just yet.
The smile that he gave was soft, despite the strength it carried. Maddie nodded stiffly, finally releasing his arm. Wachowski stopped to give her a brief hug, nuzzling her shoulder and breathing in the scent of home. Flashing his mother a bright smile, he turned down the hallway, towards the direction of the hangar Scarves had been staying in for the past couple of days. Buck followed the kid, shooting the human woman an apologetic glance as he passed her by. The hangar was dimly lit. Tails leaned against the bare mattress and poring over a bright scanner. The fox glanced up as the two entered.
Glad to see you two are back.
He said quietly, but despite the silence, the words were genuine. Wachowski headed towards Scarves and Tails' shoulders tensed. Near the mattress, Shadow was leaning against a table, a perfectly good chair standing beside him. Buck didn't bother to hide rolling his eyes, amused at the glare the not his Shadow shot him.
You just can't resist antagonizing another version of me, can you?
His own shadow spoke up from the corner of the room.
It's not as easy anymore with you. Let me have this. But seriously, how are you feeling? You looked pretty rough before we left.
He said it as he beamed at the taller shadow. The taller shadow shifted, avoiding Buck's gaze with a scowl.
The child's energy was sufficient. I was able to filter out enough to suit my own body for the time being.
Why couldn't you filter anymore?
Wachowski looked at him, distracted from his own conversation with Tails.
Because otherwise I'd end up like him. My body is fine-tuned and efficient. Would you expect anything less from the ultimate life form?
Shadow sneered, nodding towards Scarves. Behind him, a loud snort sounded out, but by the time they all looked, the other Shadow's face was perfectly neutral.
Can you do that for Scars? I can give you the energy and you can filter it for him, right?
Shadow looked taken aback, the taller hedgehog staring for a beat before shaking his head.
And why should I do that? I've helped enough if you ask me. If Sonic wishes to disgrace himself in this way, I'm not going to try and stop him.
Buck's shadow approached the group, now red eyes hard and cold.
You owe Wachowski. He gave you the energy you needed to begin with. And if we're anything alike, we both know how we feel about standing depths.
Buck watched the exchange, impressed with the deftness that his own shadow handled this. How far he'd come.
He's responsible for this situation in the first place. But I will help, as much as I can anyway. Filtering energy is consuming in its own way. I cannot do it indefinitely.
The words sounded forced, as if he hated to admit this one flaw. Wachowski, however, clapped his hands delightedly.
Anything is better than nothing. Let's get to it then.
It had only been about half an hour that Shadow had been at Scar's bedside, brow furrowed in intense concentration, as he took energy from Wachowski and filtered it towards Scar's. Already, the energy was making great strides, stabilizing the blue hedgehog more than the medicine could. But the dark hedgehog was struggling to get him to even this state. The energy too foreign and complex for him to filter with ease.
Hey, cut it out.
Buck's shadow watched his taller counterpart consume his own energy almost entirely through the filtering process. Probing the other felt almost like a breach of privacy, but he'd had a hunch this other self might expend himself more than he should. The other hedgehog ignored him, eyes still closed in concentration. Shadow grit his teeth and breathed slowly before speaking again.
I said, cut it out. Your energy is...
I don't do things halfway. I can filter them out more.
One eye cracked open to glare at him tiredly.
And if you do, you'll end up like him. Don't be stubborn.
Shadow jerked his head sharply to Scar's still form.
Guys, can you two please be quiet?
The croak caught everyone's attention. All eyes snapped to Scar's, who was now definitely glaring at the two black hedgehogs.
Shadow? Nice to see you two, and as much as I appreciate the whole not destroying your rival shtick right now, I would like a nap without a pair of deep, angry voices being passive-aggressive towards each other.
He greeted them curtly, eyes sliding closed as he settled again onto the bare mattress.
Seems like my effort paid off after all.
The taller shadow shot his other a smug look, withdrawing his hand from Scar's and brushing off Wachowski's hold on his arm. But before Shadow could snarl out a reply and wipe that smug look off his face, he was suddenly and expertly sidestepped by Buck, who all but shoved the two shadows out of his way.
Scars, buddy! Boy, am I glad to see you're awake.
Scars cracked one bleary eye, the edge of his mouth quirking into a smile as he recognized Buck.
Oh, nice to see another good-looking hedgehog around these parts.
I'll say, you've looked better, but I guess handsome is still handsome.
Har. Oh, hey kiddo, I suppose I have to thank you again.
Sonic winced, looking between Shadow of this dimension and Scarves.
Something like that. Shadow helped this time around too.
Scars pursed his lips, glancing at the darker hedgehog.
Now that is surprising news.
Scowling, Shadow got up from his seat.
If I knew you were going to be this ungrateful, Sonic, I would have let your energy bleed out.
So, I suppose you'll be wanting a thank you card?
I wouldn't be opposed to.
Okay, yeesh, banter later, fixing now.
Buck cut in, shooting the two a reproachable stare to little effect. He looked at Scars, now gaze turning serious.
Look, bud, you aren't out of the woods yet. This energy,
He gestured towards the tallest shadow, who sniffed promptly.
it only buys you some time. We're still looking for alternatives, so just hang in there, okay?
Scars looked at Buck. The hedgehog was only a year or two younger than him, but he could see that Buck already had a strong grasp on dire situations, even in this current state. Scars grinned as best as he could, ignoring the sparks of pain in his body.
Don't worry about me. I'm all good.
Maddie had insisted on giving Scar's shadow a bed to rest after expending his energy. It didn't take very long for the hedgehog to fall into a light sleep as well. Awake in the hangar, Scar struggled to fall asleep himself, despite the exhaustion and ache that plagued his waking body. Noise near the entrance caught his attention, and the blue hedgehog turned his head to see a familiar silhouette at the entrance. Tail stopped hesitantly, as if he were still a kid of only 6 years old.
Can't sleep?
Scarbs asked, his voice barely making an impact in the quiet pre-dawn air. Tails nodded as he approached the bed, silently as a shadow. Scars took in the deep bags under the fox's eyes, his bloodshot gaze, and cinched forearms.
Tails, you look awful.
Tails snorted, echoed like a gunshot in the quiet, but neither Shadow in his bed or Wachowski on the hammock stirred at it.
Yeah, well, you look.
Wake, Dust.
The hedgehog provided helpfully. It must have been the wrong thing to say. Tails' face fell like a steel door, expression hard and angry.
Don't even joke about that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Scars apologized, reaching out for his brother. Sighing, Tails took his hand gently into his own, still sensitive from the burns that he had suffered earlier. Scars felt so tired. The crackle of energy in his chest had been flickering so low for what felt like ages now.
Feels like I've already died.
The thought was a dry, humorous chuckle, and he didn't dare voice it out loud. But it wasn't tinged with fear. After all, Scars had faced the prospect of death many times now. Facing it alone, however, it was more than he could bear.
Hey, Rod.
The words grated in his throat, and if he had any more energy, he might hate himself for what he was about to ask.
Will you stay?
He hoped Tails could forgive him for this cowardice.
Of course, I'm your sidekick, remember?
Scars laughed, though it sounded more like a cough.
Right, best sidekick in the world, if I remember correctly. Beat them all out in the audition, didn't you?
Tails laughed softly, remembering the simpler times where their biggest worry was only Eggman trying to audition to become Sonic's sidekick as a part of some stupid ruse. At that moment, his communicator began beeping erratically with an incoming call. The fox glanced at it, annoyed, before shooting Scars an apologetic look.
I'll be back, okay?
Nodding, Scars released his hand, smiling encouragingly at the fox.
I know, little bud. I'll be here.
Tails hadn't communicated with the group back on Angel Island for a couple hours now, his mind occupied with Scars here on the mainland. Knuckles was rattling off a plan so threadbare and simple it hardly sounded coherent at all. What he was proposing wasn't even a shot in the dark. The Tails knew they were out of options, out of plans.
Bring him to the Emerald.
Knuckles had told him, voice cracking oddly through the communicator. The fact tapped at the back of Tails' mind. There shouldn't be interference on the isolated island.
It's dead!
Tails snapped, remembering what they told him of the gem before he'd left. A couple of faces in the living room turned to look at him at the outburst, concerned, but no one could fault him for the losses of his temper. Taking a deep breath, Tails evened his tone out with some effort.
We're not moving him.
Tails, he doesn't have much time.
You think I don't know that?
The vicious snarl was traced by an abrupt biting sob, and Tails bit down on his tongue at the sound, cobweb flooding his mouth. He refused to cry.
Why? I need you to tell me why. If you're going to ask me to do this to him, I need to know why. Because it will sentence him to die without machines, without shadows filtering energy. He'd die.
Knuckles was silent for a moment. The quiet seemed to stretch into eternity. The quiet crackle of interference over the communicator sounding more like a jet roar in the wake of the emptiness.
It's a feeling.
A disbelieving laugh made its way past the fox's lips, mangled and wrong.
Seriously?
I know it's stupid. I know I don't have the best idea, but I've been feeling this pull recently. Something is incomplete, and Sonic is incomplete right now too. Look, I wish I could give you better words about all of this, but it's worth a shot, isn't it?
Tails swallowed hard, closing his eyes. One thought raced through his head with icy clarity. Sonic might very well not make it. But Tails would try anything before that time came. He'd meet it head on, crawling until he himself had no breath left.
All right, we'll be there soon.
Buck made quick work of mobilizing everyone, the hedgehog falling into a role that seemed to fit him like a glove. If he was being honest with himself, Scars was a bit envious of his older self's casual optimism and natural leadership, but he knew those emotions came more from his inability to help, rather than any true bitterness. Maddie was sent home, an exhausted shadow brushing off any concern as Chaos controlled her back. Scars was quickly loaded onto a machine from Eggman, the Fox's usual machines far too small to safely and quickly transport the weakened hedgehog. Buck, Baby, and the two shadows loaded up onto the plane, determined to see this through to the end. Despite no longer being able to give the weakened hedgehog any more of his chaos energy, Wachowski refused to be placed too far from Scars. The younger hedgehog following him closely, ears occasionally flickering as if responding to someone calling him, though no one did. The ride was mostly silent, the space filled with the muted roar of the engines and the occasional conversation between Buck and his shadow. BB lingered near Wachowski, concern in the furrow of his brow, as Wachowski sat a few feet from Scars. Scars felt exhaustion deep in his soul. The remnants of energy Shadow had been able to give him fizzled deep in his chest. Had he the strength, he might bemoan the fact that he now owed the angry hedgehog a favor. The plane landed a bit shakily, Tails calling out a short apology at the jostling movement. The metal groaned in protest. When the hatch door opened, the morning light shining far too bright, they turned to see Knuckles and Amy waiting at the end of the ramp. Scars glanced around, doing his best to sit up to get a proper look at the greeting party. Knuckles seemed different, for lack of a better word. Older. He seemed to carry a different sort of gravity around him. But when he shot him that same goofy smile, after a beat, Scars relaxed instantly. Knuckles carried him, the echidna frowning at Scars. Scars tried to avoid thinking about how much this felt like his funeral.
Attending my own funeral. Classy.
Scars thought sarcastically. There was hardly any past tense now. Staying awake on its own felt like a monumental task. Knuckles thankfully said little as he carried him, the echidna uncharacteristically silent. Scars could tell something had changed, for lack of a better word. Knux was still the same, but there was a firmer set on his shoulder, a presence he lacked before. It reminded him a little of the shorter red echidna. He might have laughed at the sight that greeted them once they reached the top of the shrine. Everyone was there, winding the path to an altar. As it was a little too odd as the group parted down the middle to allow Knuckles and his charge through. Scars frowned at his friend's grave expression.
You look so serious.
The joke was ruined by the pathetic rasp of his throat, lips moving sluggishly. Knuckles looked at him for a moment, as if weighing his answer.
It's serious.
Beside Knuckles was Buck's shadow, offering his other self the occasional support. The taller shadow had snarled and snapped at anyone's offer of help, until Buck's shadow had quietly threatened to knock him out if he didn't accept. The sight was odd, to say the least, but without enough energy to replenish himself, his own shadow had already begun to suffer the same side effects as Scars had. Less accelerated, but steady nonetheless. Kick-started energy consumption processes. Starving body. the whole shebang. Scars exhaled, letting the weight of his eyelids win for the moment. He was so tired. It felt like he's been fighting against an inescapable tide for weeks. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to give in, to be dragged under. Then a whisper ran through his mind, saying, "Not yet." Electrifying and deep, a shiver scattered through his body, and Scars forced his eyes to open. Right. There were still people who were rooting for him. Tails, Wachowski, Amy, Buck, Knuckles, BB, and Scars hated to disappoint. Knuckles laid him gently on the stone, and Scars had to blink out what was suddenly in front of him. Vaguely, he heard shadows settling on the ground beside him, breath coming in harsh bursts. A gem. A huge gem. It was beautiful in a solemn way. Its gray tinge reminded him of a tombstone.
It's dying.
He wasn't sure how he knew this, but he did. It must have been such a beautiful gem too, before whatever happened to it.
Will you pray with me?
Knuckles' voice rang out, the taller echidna sounding uncertain as he turned to his counterpart and Tikal. Tikal nodded firmly, a firm set to her jaw, as she took a spot on the right of Knuckles, the resistance leader taking the spot on the left of his counterpart.
Of course. Lead the prayer, we'll follow, just like I showed you.
The shorter echidna murmured, settling into a cross-legged position. Scars tuned them out as they began their prayer, the words soothing and repetitive. The gem called to him, as if eager to steal his attention away. It would soon be dead. The hedgehog never imagined he'd have anything in common with a massive green gem in the middle of nowhere. But hey, even the fates seemed to have crazy twists ready for him. He was still hanging on, but it was so hard. It lingered at the edges of his vision, the endless darkness encroaching. He was so tired. A whisper said, "Breathe in." Extending one hand weakly, Scars wondered what the gem might feel like. Cold? Warm? But his gloves were too thick, hands too clammy to sense that much through the fabric. Grunting in frustration, Scars tugged at the edges. Shadow must have noticed, glancing between Scars and the praying echidnas before making a choice. In two deft movements, Scars' gloves were off, dropping into the space beside his head. The blue hedgehog could hardly spend the energy it took to move, let alone thank the other hedgehog. He reached out again, feeling like he was moving through quicksand. The world ground to a halt erratically, but defiantly. Still, Scars reached out, feeling a missing piece settle deep within himself. The spot resonating with the same timbre as the whisper from before, harmonizing. The pads of his fingers cradled the gem. The whisper said, "Breathe out." The world stopped. He understood now, palm pressed against the surface of the gem. He could feel the answer. The void the planet sat in was unnatural, dead brush, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. The right spark. The emerald was the flint, and he was the last remaining ember. Finally, the whisper breathed in his mind. Relief and eagerness wrapped into a single word. All around him, the world burst to life. He gasped. The shock of energy was powerful and right. It belonged here. It was from here. His entire soul soaked it up like a scorched land in rainfall. But before he could celebrate, eyes squinting against the growing glow of the emerald, a ripple. But before he could celebrate, eyes squinting against the growing glow of the emerald, a ripple at its center caught his eye. The spot shifted like water boiling beneath the emerald's growing radiance, shielding his eyes. Scars tried to make out the shape within brilliant emerald green.
Hey guys, I think it's okay. I think it's healing.
Before he could finish, a hand wrapped around his arm, formless and clawed. It came from within the emerald. Before anyone could move, Scars was pulled in.